Hello, Jamey.
Hello, Jeff.
It's on you, it's all on me. Can't you see? It's on you, it's all on me. You and me, can't you? It's on you, it's on me.
Hey, Craig. Right or wrong, we don't care. Win or lose, we don't care. We don't care. We don't care. We don't care.
Whoa. I haven't done this in a while, Jamey. Jamey, this is like... I'm actually a little bit afraid to look back at how long it's been since Craig and I made a show. I mean, just rough estimate. It's maybe like 3 months?
Oh,
2.5 months? It
goodness.
was. I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure it was Thanksgiving.
So it's
or
actually
shortly
nothing
thereafter.
for everyone. Not even podcast for everyone.
I
Just nothing.
know. It's well, it's it's funny. So like for the longest time. By the way, welcome to Podcast versus Everyone. I'm Jeff Newser, one of your hosts here, and I'm joined by Jamey Vinnick, Cougs fans' newly named Palouse Bureau Chief, Jamey Vinnick. So congratulations on that, buddy.
Thank you very much. I consider myself a considerable upgrade to your normal partner.
Well, I will say
Are we
this:
recording?
one department you definitely have Craig on. So Craig's taking a little break. One department you definitely have Craig on. We definitely upgraded the beard volume because we are definitely we are bearded. We are very bearded men. But you have an excellent future. By the way, I don't know if anybody's told you have an excellent future as a Santa someday when you are gray. So we're talking 40 years from now when you are no longer the Palouse Bureau Chief at CougFan.com. Or maybe you still will be. I don't know. Maybe you
What's
still will
really
be.
ironic about that is I'm actually Jewish, so that's going to be a little bit of a conflict of interest. Can you be
Hey,
Santa?
man.
Well, I mean, sure.
Hey, man. Listen. I know Jewish people who observe the just the festivities, right? That's all you got to do.
If someone asked me to be Santa, I'd be disinclined to say no.
I love it. All right. Well, anyway, hey, welcome to the podcast. Like I said, I'm Jeff. That's Jamey. Craig's taking a break. It's been, like I said, a long time. It actually is. It's funny. Like Craig and I, for the longest time we've been doing this show for, I don't know, 5 years, 6 years, whatever it is. And at the beginning, like a lot of things in life, right? You are very committed. And we were finding things to do. We were like every week. And even during like that first off season, we did a thing. Some of the longtime listeners might remember. We did a thing called Everyone in 60. So we would basically say, hey, we're going to watch football games from last season. We'll tell you here's the link. We'll tell you when to push play. And then we'll just kind of do a running commentary while we're watching the game to sort of fill it. So we had all these like ideas. And then as you go, you're doing the show for a long time, it becomes much easier to be like, man, I don't feel great this week. Or I'm just not. And then you go for a week. So like back at the beginning of this thing, man, we took a trip together to Mexico. Like I think we mentioned that on the last show, was that we were getting ready to head off to Cabo together. Our two families, just me and my wife and him and Amanda. And so we were like talking about that. Well, then, we went down there and we came back and we were kind of tired and we didn't feel like doing a show right after that. And then a little more time went by. Well, now it's the holidays. Now it's Christmas. Like, and I'm a teacher, right? Most people know this. I'm a teacher. It is one of those things where it's like right before the holidays, actually very busy. And so like we just, excuse after excuse and excuse. And then, Jake Dickert leaves and it's like, oh, maybe we should probably do a show. Well, we're busy. And anyway, so here we go. We are climbing back. And then, the last 2 weeks, so Jamey and I have been planning to record this for 2 weeks. So Jamey, tell the folks like how I kept stonewalling you to the point where you probably were wondering if I actually was just like backing out, I bet.
I was waiting for a text from Jeff. Hey, I think I have the bubonic plague or just something so outlandish, which, hey, we were going to record at 8 or 9 anyways, which is fine by me. I just wouldn't get off Xbox. I would just play more. I'd be working. So I was in California these past few days, enjoying a little sunshine with the family, and I said, I'll text Jeff, and I'm thinking, all right, let's see what the illness is this time. He's like, let's do it. And as I'm driving back from the Spokane airport, I'm like, all right, is there a phone call?
Yeah.
I've got scurvy.
Here we are. We made it. Well, I would say that anybody who, well, first of all, like I said, I work in schools, right? I'm a high school teacher, so we have had more absences the last 3 weeks than I can remember in a long, pre-COVID type stuff. Is gross. And anybody who has small children kind of knows what's going on right now. There's this flu going around. There's upper respiratory thing going around. I had them both. I had the upper respiratory thing 2 weeks ago. I had to beg out on Jamey. I'm like, so basically this is the third Tuesday in a row we've tried to do this. 2 weeks ago, I was like, dude, I've got this thing. If I try to talk for more than about a minute, I start hacking, and it's I get a coughing fit. I can't stop. And then a week ago, that's when I got the flu. I had to cancel on Jamey, and I'm like, dude, I am laying in bed. It was 5 o'clock. I am laying in bed already. I've got the chills. I'm sitting here thinking, Jamie's going to think I'm making this up to get out of this. I'm trying to think of excuses. Oh yeah. Laying in bed with the chills.
At your age, these things happen, right?
Yes, this is what happens when you get old. I will admit to that. This is what happens when you get old. But anyway, all right. So this podcast versus everyone. A few things just kind of draw your attention to right off the top before we get rolling. We will talk about men's hoops. We'll talk about what the fuck happened to the team. So we'll kind of break that down. We'll talk about Gonzaga. We'll eventually get into, we will make use of Jamey's encyclopedic knowledge of football recruiting, which is not always Craig and I's strong suit. So having that expertise around, we'll talk about that a little bit. We'll wrap up with some women's hoops. Before we get to that, just want to remind you, the best way to follow what we do is by subscribing to the newsletter. So podcast.vseveryone.com. If you don't already subscribe to the newsletter, you can subscribe there. I do a bunch of writing, do breakdowns after basketball games. I sometimes write about other stuff that's on my mind. Also, when we record new podcasts, we ship that out via the newsletter to your email inbox. Other ways you can keep up with what we're doing, subscribe to the podcast. If you're listening to this, you probably already subscribed, but if you're listening to it and you don't subscribe, you can subscribe on any major podcast app, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. I use Overcast. That's my app of choice on my phone. You can find it on there. Any regular podcast app, you're going to be able to find it. And then also, some of you may be watching this on YouTube, so we've started recording our shows, posting them to YouTube with video, so you can see our gorgeous faces. And that's part of why I invited Jamey, by the way. I had to make sure that there was still another person on the podcast better looking than me. So I went and made sure and did that. So you can watch it on YouTube at your leisure on that. And again, same kind of deal there. If you're watching it on YouTube, really helps us out if you subscribe. So if you can click that subscribe button, that definitely helps us out, opens up opportunities for us. And then also just kind of tells the algorithm, hey, people like this. So if people like it, then it puts it in front of more eyeballs, as I'm sure if you've ever spent any time on YouTube. So that is the spiel. And then the last thing I'll tell you is we want to remind everybody we do have our premium membership, which includes some special content, but the big perk is that you get access to our members only Slack, which is really basically like a message board, for lack of a better term. And my co-host tonight, Jamey, spends a lot of time in there just hanging out, chatting with people, talking about stuff. So that is also one of the perks there, is you get to hang out with smart people. And the thing that I always like to say, if people were around in the Cougs Center days back when we kind of were first starting, it's a lot like that. A lot of really smart people, a lot of really smart discussion, people asking really good questions, really wanting to think things through, but also very funny. So just kind of the most passionate people hanging out and talking Cougs sports, and sometimes laughing together and crying together, as would be the case with the basketball team at the moment. So if you're interested in that, podcastvseveryone.com, there's an upgrade button. If you click upgrade, it's $50 for a year. That gets you 12 months. That's about $4 a month. Or if you want to go monthly, it's $5 a month. So That's my plug for that. If you want to help us and help us make more shows. All right. All that being said, Jamey, let's go back to our original question. What in the fuck? This is the question that I get most often. I don't know about you. I get this question most often from people, both on the Slack and like on Blue Sky, where I spend most of my time hanging out now on social media. Like people are like, what happened? What happened? And I'm like, I mean, I have ideas, but I want to hear your ideas first. So of course, team started red hot, looked really good, has now lost, whatever it is, 7 out of 8 or 6 out of 7 or whatever it is. And looked really bad, mostly doing it, other than the one win against Pepperdine, which also looked pretty bad for a half. So, to your mind, as you've kind of thought about, you cover the team, on a daily basis, like what's your read on what you think is kind of going on and what it is that's caused them to fall off so bad?
Yeah, I think what has happened is a lot of what we thought would happen immediately when Cedric Coward went down. And I'm not gonna say, oh, that's why they've lost these games. I don't care if you have Cedric Coward or not. You shouldn't lose Pacific twice. Doesn't matter if he plays or not. You shouldn't need a game-saving block shot to beat Pepperdine with or without Cedric Coward. But
right.
I think it was almost some fool's gold there for a little bit because Coward goes down and then they beat Nevada and they beat Boise State. And it's like, okay, like maybe they can win without him. And at that point, they didn't have Wilson. They had Favors for 4 minutes against Nevada. And then they beat San Francisco without him, and then at that point without Isaiah Watts, and they beat a decent Northern Iowa team without both of them, and even they beat LMU, who you never know what you're going to get from them on a game-to-game basis. I think that Pacific game was the first sign of, oh boy, there could be some trouble. And I think once they came back and they beat San Diego and they beat Portland, it's like, okay, the San Diego game wasn't pretty, but they found a way to gut one out. And then even when you look at the Santa Clara and the St. Mary's games, right, the road and home game that started that losing streak, okay, yes, the Santa Clara game was ugly, but Santa Clara was on another planet of shooting at that point. We had just seen them beat Gonzaga. They played, the St. Mary's game was maybe the best game they've played since the first Pacific loss. Maybe you could argue, the win over Portland or maybe even the loss to Oregon State, but like they played really well against St. Mary's. And it ultimately boiled down to the fact that St. Mary's has a bunch of guys who have played together for 4 years. The basket I point to in that game was, I think, put him up 4 with 30 seconds left was Marshall Owens on the little tip-in alley-oop to Saxon. And it's like, that's not a prayer play. That's a play that here are two guys who have played in the same system for 4 years. Like, that's a game where I thought they competed. They scored more points per possession against St. Mary's than any WCC team had done since I think it was the Zags in like the 2023 conference tournament.
Yep.
The next two games is where things were like, oh, this isn't good. And granted, we talked about doing this at the top of a few minutes ago. They were destroyed by the flu. And the flu's been going around the basketball teams like crazy. The women's game against Gonzaga a couple weeks ago, a couple of the coaches were masked on the bench, but you lost to Pacific again, and then you lose to San Francisco. And then now it's become a trend of, okay, this just seems to kind of be what they are. And I think what they are is a team with talent. I don't think they're devoid of talent, but I think that they're a team of a lot of guys who you just don't have the cohesion of playing together. And again, part of that is your leader's been in street clothes now for 3 months. And I think part of it is the guys, the focal points of your team, the Nate Calmeses, the Isaiah Watts, the Lawan Watts, are all very good players, but they're all very emotional players. The highs are great, but then the lows are really low. You see what Nate's capable of, where he can, get you close to 30 on some nights, and then you see the 2 points and the 3 points. You see I think Zay's maybe a little more mature, but it's still the highs and lows. And same with Lawan. Lawan's obviously an incredibly talented player, an incredible athlete, but you see the frustrations, you see the issues with the keys. And then I think you look towards last year, and obviously, yes, Isaiah was an emotional player still last year, maybe even more so. So was Miles. But then you offset that with the steady presences of Jalen Wells, of Isaac Jones, of Andre Szymanski.
Yes.
And I don't think they have – I think Ethan's a very steady presence, but he's not so much the guy who's going to, step up and give you a kick in the ass if things are going wrong. That's not and that's just not his personality.
Right.
And again, the guy that you expected to do that has been in street clothes for 3 months. That's
right.
where you miss Coward, and I think that there has just been, and then I think on the other side, there's some issues with the roster and just the way it was constructed to start the season. And again, the Coward injury threw a lot of things off. Your rotations got screwed up, your scoring, your ball handling, everything. But I look especially at the front court, and what has been one of the biggest issues for this team is rebounding. And the reason I think is, Price and Eric Strip they're realistically guards that are just 6'10". They're not, and this isn't they become this. This is what they were. They can score around in and around the paint, but that's not where their strength is. I mean, Dane Erick's shooting 65% from two, which is great. But he's only taken 98 twos at 6'11" versus 141 threes. Bryce has taken actually dead even, 115 on twos, 115 on threes. And you look at last year, what helped make that team so dominant is you had Isaac Jones just running the paint. I mean, and you just don't have that. I mean, Andy Okafor's that style of player, but he's not at that level. He's a nice reserve big and, can block some shots when he doesn't get pulled out of position, but just doesn't have the natural post-player ability. And I think when you look at what helped make a lot of the Kyle Smith team successful was that guy. And and that doesn't mean that they couldn't stretch the floor. Like, were Effa and Mo great shooters? No, but you had to at least account for them. Whereas this is the flip side of you don't really have to worry about Price isn't going to go down and back down Graham Ike.
Right.
They're going to hit their threes, but it's going to hurt your offensive rebounding. And then just on the same side of the defensive rebounding, teams are so good at getting them into switching, and they switch so often, you end up with a guard on Eric Strip. So there's two scenarios. The guard blows by Eric Strip and either gets in the lane or gets fouled, or shot goes up, and you've got whoever the center is, you got Cal Mees or Isaiah Watts defending a center. That's an easy putback. So I think some of it is again, the amount of switching they do, but I do think that they needed and need, going forward, a true post presence, a guy who has one job, and that's, I don't care if he averages 5 points a game, he averages 9 rebounds. Basically, what Ruben did. I mean, you don't necessarily, sure, you'd love to have the production Oscar Clough's giving at South Dakota State, but someone even just like Ruben who, he's not going to get you a ton of points, but he's just going to clean the glass. And I think that is the big thing where when I look at the roster side of things, that seems to be, okay, they are missing that, and they're just missing some of that veteran leadership.
Yeah, I think something you said that I thought was interesting was, you use the phrase fool's gold after Cedric Howard went out. And I have kind of a hard time with that. If only because, and so here's kind of my premise on that. I am just sort of the opinion that defense is almost never really fool's gold unless you are, you're just giving up really, really super open looks and the other team's they're in a cold streak of just missing them. Right. Yeah. And that sort of thing does happen. But, after Coward went down, those wins against Nevada and Boise State, which are obviously the two big ones, and then Northern Iowa, it's okay, so you look at those 3 games, the defense was really, really, really good. And it wasn't just, open missed shots. It wasn't like those 2 teams or those 3 teams really just missed lots and lots of shots. If I'm looking here quickly, see, this is always the magic of
I got Nevada went 4 for 20 from 3 in that game. And there were
they went 4 for 20, but they also only took 20, right? So there is an element to defense where you're not you're not allowing teams a whole lot of looks from 3. You're kind of running them off the line. You're making them come inside where your tall guys are. And we were doing a lot of that early on in the season, and that Nevada game was like that. The Boise State game, they shot, 25%. So again, that may have been a little bit more of a cold shooting fluke, but still.
And second Hart in foul trouble didn't hurt.
Yeah, and Degenhart in foul trouble. And we'll come back to this idea, but in both of those games, their defensive rebounding was on point. Mm-hmm. And so in both of those games, they held the other team to under 30% offensive rebounding, which is really good. Yeah. It's not like dominant, but it's good.
Yeah.
It's definitely above average. So great. That's the thing, right? So they're missing shots and you are cleaning up the rebounds, right?
Mm-hmm.
And as you move through the year, what ends up happening is the defense just gets worse and worse and worse and worse. And I'm going to see, so I'm going to test this out on the YouTube. I know that I'm supposed to be able to share a screen here, so I'm going to try this really quick.
Let's see
if I can share a screen. Here we go. I think it worked.
There we go. All right, there we go.
There's Jeff's screen. Okay, so if you're on YouTube, so I will try to do the podcast and YouTube thing kind of at the same time. But if you're on your YouTube, what you're seeing is a graph that's got WSU's adjusted game-by-game defense. So in other words, what they do on a per-possession basis against each team with sort of adjusted for the quality of the opponent, right? And so the big takeaway here is what you see is as the season goes along, there's like this trend line, right? And it's like diagonal. And what you want from that trend line is ideally you'd like it to start low on the left and end high on the right, right? And what you're seeing here is the opposite of that. It starts high on the left and it is just going down and down and down on the right. And this is a graph from, BartTorvik.com he does a very similar thing to Ken Palm, but he's got some, fancy looking graphs. But it's like basically like, what you see here is that the defense has just gotten worse and worse and worse and worse. And when you're thinking about, okay, so why did the defense get so much worse? That's the part that I find sort of confounding. Is I'm not sure exactly why. I can look at statistical indicators. Like I can say, okay, they're blocking fewer shots than they were earlier in the year. One of the things earlier in the year was like, oh, wow, Dane Erikstrup is blocking shots at like twice the rate of what he used to, right? So like at Eastern, I want to say he was like blocking shots somewhere around like 3%, 3.5%, something like that, which is, 3.5% of the twos that go up on the floor. When he's on the floor, he's blocking them. Okay. If you're getting up around 10%, that's really good. That's like elite, is where you want it, or above 10%, right? Well, he was at like 7%, something like that, which is like, okay, you're 6'11", you should be, blocking 6-7% of shots. That's awesome. Ethan Price also was kind of doing the same thing. He was ahead of his historical rate. And then again, that has just dropped off. That's gone down. ND Okafor was blocking a lot of shots earlier in the year. That kind of dropped off. And then what went along with that was that defensive rebounding that we talked about, where it was really good early in the year and now it's fucking horrible. And what's hard is like figuring out, okay, what's what, right? So there's like, are they bad at rebounding because they're bad at defense? Are they bad at defense because they're bad at rebounding? All of a sudden, are they like, what's the actual driving factor here, right? And I've talked to some coaches and they'll tell you like, hey, look, if you are struggling on defense and you're out of position on defense, you are going to be out of position to rebound. Like, you're going to struggle to rebound. And so it's a chicken or egg thing. And I guess either way, it becomes kind of this like, like this vicious cycle, right? Where you got one thing, you got the other thing, and they both just kind of feed off each other in a problematic way. So like if I were to put my finger on literally one thing, I mean, the offense, you mentioned a whole bunch of the offensive issues. I don't totally disagree, except that the numbers say that the offense has been okay and it hasn't gotten markedly worse. It's not quite as good as it was earlier in the year. That little, if I were to pull up the offensive graph, you would see like a very slight downward trend, but it's pretty small, right? Ideally, again, you want it to go up, but at the same time, you'd kind of expect maybe with the personnel issues you mentioned, right? That the offense would struggle, or at least maybe not like really improve. So the one thing I point to is this like defense. And I'm like, that is hard to watch, because that theoretically, you talked about Kyle Smith, that being the bread and butter for his teams. Like that seems like something that's in your control for the most part, right? You can't always control whether you're going to make shots, but you can, to some degree, control how you defend. And they've just been so poor at it now for going on 2 months basically. And it's getting worse too. Like, that's the thing. Like, it's not like it's like, oh man, they were up here, now they're just kind of hanging out down here. It's like, no, they were up here, now they're kind of down here, now they're farther down here. Now they're like, and in fact, the defense against St. Mary's this last weekend in Saturday's loss was like actually their best performance in like 3 games.
Yeah.
Even though they gave up 1.25 points per possession or something, just because St. Mary's
offensive rebounding rate.
Just because St. Mary's is really good.
Yeah.
But
they only
so I point to the defense.
21% from 3. The percentages were fine. They just turned it over on offense, of course, and they didn't turn St. Mary's over, which again, it's
right.
St. Mary's,
which
that's what
not
they
surprising.
Do. No,
they don't give the ball away.
Basically, St. Mary's basically played the same offensive game to some degree that they played in Pullman. I think they were a little more efficient in Pullman. The difference was Wazoo wasn't as efficient offensively. The St. Mary's game was that's the one game where you're just that's just kind of what St. Mary's does. They are really good, and they're old, and they're well coached, and all these things. It's for me, and I think we've talked about too, is it's the 86 to Pepperdine. I mean, where Pepperdine scores 1.3 points per possession. I mean, they literally followed that up. They scored 55 against Gonzaga, and it's not like Gonzaga is renowned for their defense this year. Their defense has actually been, they're 42nd on KenPom, but we've seen, the conversations that Mark Few has had and some of the comments he's had that their defense hasn't been good enough, and Gonzaga held them to 55, and Pepperdine had just put up 64 on Portland.
Right.
Their own gym. That's where the issues come in, and it kind of, the thing that makes me wince more than anything is, and this was what killed Ernie Kent's teams, is you take one guy, and that guy's going to go off. And I'm not talking about that it's going to be the Augustus Marshallonis or the Malik Thomas. I'm talking about they're going to get killed by Mo Odom and Paulius Morauskas and Todorovic for Pepperdine, and obviously Lamar Washington or Fala and Kings for Oregon State, and you just who Wang Wong, the Chinese guy for San Francisco.
Yep.
Remember that San Francisco game? Malik Thomas didn't play, and they gave up 75 points to.
Oh yeah.
Yes,
I remember.
Junju Wang. The guy from Pacific who hit the game winner in the second game, Jazz Gardner, who had 14 points in that game and has 15 points since. It's the Kravakovic, the guy, the little tattooed guard who torched twice, and it's those guys where it's just okay, why is this? And sometimes that's basketball. The one I always point to is I think it was last year against Grambling, and Grambling brought some kid off the bench who put up 35 on Wazoo. Where the? And sometimes that just happens. But
by the way, I call that the Mason Landeck phenomenon. So
ironic that is a prime example. that game with they get by Landeck, who ended up playing D2 basketball. But
I know.
And that's just, and then it was Johnny O'Neill against Santa Clara, and it always, and then you go back to again with Kent, there was always those issues. All right, who's the guy averaging 6 points a game? There was Stanford had the little guard Cartwright, who's some guy who was at Stanford because he was really smart and averaged 5 points a game, and then suddenly here's 6 threes, and those are the things that concern me too. It's sometimes they can do an okay job against the Stars. You look at that first Gonzaga game, and yes, okay, EK absolutely torched them, but they held Nembhard to 5 assists. Which for Ryan Nembhard is the worst game of his life. Since that game, he's averaging 11. They did a good job on battle. It's then just you have, Hickman goes for 5 threes, and you can't stop Huff and Stromer, and it's just those issues of, sometimes you have an answer or at least something for the best player. This last game, Saxon didn't do anything for St. Mary's on Saturday. I think Marshallonis had one of his. He had one of his games, 16 points, 7 assists, but it's not like he went for 25. It's, all right, here's Morauskas going for 30. a guy who would, who after torching you for 25 had 35 points in the interim 6 games, and then here's 30, and it's not just 30, it's 10 of 13 from 2. That's what's if he
scoring
the land that game is half of those came from the free throw line.
Yeah. So I don't know, man, because my feeling is, and we'll talk about Gonzaga here in a sec, because that's that game. Obviously, we're recording this on Tuesday night. You'll all get this Wednesday night in what should be a packed out Beasley, which will be fun. But what sort of gets me is that the defense was good, and then suddenly it wasn't. And it's just getting worse and worse and worse. And what is so troubling about that to me is you had a situation early in the year where we were like, okay, let's even go back farther. David Riley gets hired, and we're all just sort of like, okay, like by Big Sky standards, elite offenses, right?
Oh, yeah.
And even by anybody's standard, pretty good offenses, right?
Yeah, I mean they gave Kyle Smith team some fits with their offense.
Oh yeah. Oh, you know this as well as I do. Kyle Smith's staff fucking hated playing Eastern. Like, they hated it because they were like, Riley's team's so hard to prepare for. Like, and they were just sort of like, fuck that guy in like the nicest way possible. Yeah, like in all respect, right? Like in all respect, we hate that guy. Also, we respect the hell out of him. So I know that was part of it, right? So we put together these really good offenses, but when he was hired, Craig and I were like, the defenses are really bad, like really, really bad. And, that's not going to fly even at a WCC level. It's not going to fly. Right. And, you can say Big Sky that's a low major conference. Like, that is the WCC, as bad as like the bottom of the WCC is with, Pepperdine and Portland and Pacific. Like, it's still like when you get like to the upper 2/3 of the conference, it's not a great conference, but it's pretty good as far as mid majors go. And it's like, okay, you're going to have to be able to defend. And so then, fast forward to the season starts. We're like, well, okay, so first game against Portland, like that was a mess, right?
That was a mess. I was writing about that earlier because I was doing something kind of about how they are just atrocious coming out of halftime in terms of plus minus, but amazing at the start of games. Like, they're plus 56.
Yeah.
And I'm like, and that's with plus 18 or minus 18 in that Portland State game. We're all like, what is going, where Portland State decided we're going to hit everything for like 5.
I know.
But
they shot 45% from 3 and whatever. But like after that, Bradley, great defensive performance, really good. And not like in a, again, they just missed a shit ton of threes. Like, honestly, Bradley hit 42% of their threes, but they only hit 46% on twos, and they only rebounded 23% of their misses. So you put all that together, and they turned it over a bunch. So you put all that together, and you're like, yeah, that's a good defensive performance. And then
Bradley
just sort of
good team. Like, they've stayed good.
Yeah. They had a run of games from game 2 to the Fresno State game. SMU was sort of like the first, like, shit. But even if you include SMU, I mean, they had a run of games where they didn't allow more than 1.04. So basically an average offensive performance for a team in Division I's like 1.06 points per possession, something in there. They had a run after that Portland State opener where they went Bradley, Idaho, Iowa, Northern Colorado, Eastern Washington, Fresno State, and they did not allow, in fact, in all those games except 2, they didn't allow more than 1.0 points per possession. 2 other games, they allowed like 1.3, 1.4. So still not bad. SMU was bad, but that was getting destroyed on the offensive glass.
Exactly.
And they just had no answer there. Yeah, but then on the back of SMU, you've got Nevada, you've got Boise State, you've got Missouri State. Now, Missouri State, not great, but like you're just kind of like, okay, there were just like these little blips of bad defensive performances, and you're like, okay, well maybe David Riley like has figured, like he's realized defense matters, and he's coached them up to play defense, and it seems like they're doing a good job. They actually look good doing it. They look sound in their rotations. They're not scrambling everywhere. Like, you're like, okay, this is all right. And then, like, Washington happens, and then
and even that game was like that game. I just first because it was all right. It was almost the start of because we talked about this. I remember.
Yeah.
It was the conversation of all right. DJ Davis hasn't done anything all year, and now
a bunch of non-shooters hit a bunch of threes.
Yeah,
like that's it.
And to Davis's credit, traditionally as a shooter, but hadn't been.
Hadn't been.
Obviously, there was the conversations about some of the whistles here or there, but ultimately you still lost by 16. And Iheanacho has 12 points, and hasn't even gone above 8 points since. I mean that was just, and you threw that. All right, that was a weird game. It was that just happened, and then Northern Iowa, and then it's after the Royal Marymount game is when things went to shit.
Yeah, and it's like there's all these runs of like I'm looking at these stats and I'm like game after game after game. Okay, you've got like about 2/3 of the game are all like 2/3 of the games are about under 1.06. And then you've got about a third of them where they're not great. They're above that. And you're like, okay, well these are acceptable, right? Like these are sort of within the realm of what you'd say, okay, this is fine. Well, then we had San Francisco, which, so you start getting to this point where you start chalking things up to, oh, well, it's this and it's that, right? So, oh, well, San Francisco, Malik Thomas shoots out of his mind. Okay.
But even in
that explains
game,
that.
You look at even in that game, I mean, as bad as that first half was, they held them to 33 in the second half. Thomas had like 7 points.
Yep.
They shut down Ryan Williams, who, as we see, is very good. And obviously, we mentioned how the officiating maybe slanted some stuff against Washington. It certainly helped the Cougs in that game. They shot 41 free throws, but they did a very good job adjusting to Thomas. And at that point, it was like, hey, maybe this defensive adjustments are for real. They put a lot of Lawan and Thrasher on them, but that was kind of the last swan song.
And then it's like Pacific broke them, right? Like maybe that's what it was. I don't know, whatever. But it's like, okay, so they give up 1.16 to Pacific, which is like insanely
without their leading scorer.
Yeah, and so Lamar Washington goes nuts and whatever. And you're like, okay, that's bad. And then Gonzaga, they go up to Spokane. They end up giving up 1 point. So, by the way, Pacific, right? 1.16 points per possession. That's very bad for a team that is in the 300s in adjusted offensive efficiency, right?
249.
An average team would be like, give up about 1.0 points per possession to those guys.
I'll give them credit though. They're now 273 in Ken Palm.
Oh, they've improved, no doubt. But I'm talking just at the time.
I do think Dave Smart will do a great job there, but that's
he's a good coach.
Yeah,
that's pretty obvious. But at the time, ranked in the 300s, 1.16. Gonzaga, you go up to Spokane, 1.27, right? You're like, oh, fuck. Okay, well, that's Gonzaga, right? And then, San Diego, Portland, both 0.9, 0.95. Okay, great. We're back. And then, okay, here we go. Santa Clara, 1.39. St. Mary's, 1.27. Pacific, 1.13. San Francisco, 1.11. Oregon State, 1.29. Pepperdine, 1.14. St. Mary's, 1.22. Like, that is a run that's like Ernie Kent type run of badness on defense. And so all of that to say, and it's probably time to move on to Gonzaga, but all of that to say, like, if there's a path forward here for the team, just one thing, just get the defense back to being mediocre. Like, just actively not terrible. Mediocre is fine, right? Slightly below average will probably get them wins in 3 out of the last 4 games, right?
Yeah. It's just,
like, that's kind of like, to me, that's got to be the formula. Like, somehow, some way, the defense has just got to be like mediocre. If you can just be mediocre, you'll probably win 3 of the last 4.
They have to do 3 things: defend, rebound, take care of the... Where have we heard that before?
Yeah, I know, right?
It is ironic, and I've written about this, that the 3 things that Kyle Smith just built his program on are 3 things.
Yeah.
They just cannot do. They can't defend very well. They don't rebound, and they turn the ball over.
Yep.
And that's just like literally what Kyle Smith's teams
Yes.
were.
Yeah.
They shoot the three. That depended on the day. Were they gonna force turnovers? Again, depended on the day or the year. But they were going to defend, they were going to rebound, and they weren't going to turn it over.
Yep.
After Isaac Bonton left. Love you, ID. But
Yeah.
love
But,
ID.
I mean, it's going to be interesting. Like, this will be a conversation for another day, but, I'll bet David Riley's learning a lot. He's still really young.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, the only thing that's concerned me is the defense just got so bad. And I'm just wondering, like, what it feels like is they were doing a thing. Teams sort of figured some things out with the way they were covering certain actions or whatever, figured out a way to pick on them, and they've just never been able to adjust back. And that's the part that's really concerning. It's like you should have a counter for the counter, right? And they don't seem to have a counter for the counter.
Right.
And I was hoping the St. Mary's game would show me a little something. And again, that's a really tough one to measure off of because St. Mary's is so good. But, I was hoping to maybe see after a week off, something a little more, something that just like passed the eye test a little more in terms of being ready. But it didn't. And now it's, Wednesday and they got to face Gonzaga, which is another really, really good offensive team. Now the upshot is it's at home, right? So we saw how the first game went. They hung with them for a half. Very similar to some other games they've had where they hang around for a half and then they fall apart. And so in this game, what are we thinking in terms of home matchup, keys to beating Gonzaga, keys to changing it? The atmosphere is going to be very different. I imagine this is going to be the atmosphere that these guys dreamed of when they came down from Eastern. Being able to play in a game like this that they would never have played in Cheney. So, what are your thoughts? Like, what's one big factor you think for potential success in this game?
Get Graham Ike into foul trouble.
Yeah, that'd be helpful. That would be helpful.
But in all honesty, first game he had one foul. He commits 5.1 per 40 minutes.
Yeah.
The hard truth of the matter is they don't have the personnel for him. He is too big and strong and muscular for Dane and Ethan. I don't care what the weights and the height say. That's a fact. He is too skilled and quick for ND. They don't have an option for him. And the problem is you can't just say, let's pack the paint and go zone because Gonzaga can shoot and Ike can pass out of it. What's the best way to make him ineffective? Stick him on the bench with 4 fouls. But I mean, it sounds simple, but the biggest thing to me as I was looking through this matchup, I do think if you look at the teams on paper, purely on from a skill standpoint, I don't think the starting fives are that lopsided. Yes, Gonzaga has an edge. I think the difference is when Gonzaga brings 2 top 100 recruits off the bench and brings Michael Ajayi, who was Pepperdine's best player, off the bench, whereas Wazoo is bringing off freshmen and Parker Garrett, who didn't play last year, so basically 3 guys with no experience. But like guys like Battle and Greg are good players, but they're not like when Gonzaga would roll out a starting 5 of 5 NBA players. When the starting 5 was Watson, Bolton, Hickman, Strother, and Tim. Yeah. Or
they're not as talented 1 through 5 as they've been in the past, for sure.
Or when they would roll out a front court of Timmy and Chet or anything like that. Or even last year when it was Nembhard, Watson, Hickman, and then Ike or whoever. I think Wazoo there are ways they can match. The big difference is, and I was looking at the profiles, is you go on KenPom, you go where the letters say TO rate. And it's just minuscule for all of them. The highest turnover rate on the team is Nembhard at 18.4 of guys who play. Yep. And he counters that with an assist rate of 42.
Yeah. Let me hit you with one big stat here. One of my favorite things to do at this point in the season is there's a little button on KenPom where you can click it for conference only, right? Yeah. All right, so here's a good one for you. In conference play, Gonzaga is turning the ball over when they have the ball. They're turning the ball over on 12.7% of their possessions.
Yeah.
Which
Wazoo turns it over
we
12
will often turn the ball over at twice that rate.
Yeah. Yeah, and to put that into context, Wazoo's at, I think, 22. I mean,
Yeah.
Nemhard in conference play has a turnover rate. It's actually higher. It's 20, which is still
Yeah.
and 20 for a 20% turnover rate is relatively high. It's not awful, but it's a decent. I mean, that's fairly. I mean, that's close to what like Nate's is.
It's high-ish, but when you're talking about guys who have the ball in their hands all the time, they tend to
Every single possession.
turn it over more.
Right. But I think it's, he's the leader at 18% across the whole season.
Yeah.
And the only regular Wazoo player who has lower than that is Isaiah at 17.5. And then if you want, and Thrasserson's 14.8. There's not enough sample size on Favors yet. He's at 7. And I think, that they're so different in that way. And that's part of why their offense is so effective is, they shoot the ball well. That certainly helps. I mean, that said, Wazoo has a higher effective field goal percentage than Gonzaga.
Yep.
Wazoo shoots the ball better from 2 and from 3. The difference is Gonzaga shoots the ball a whole lot more. And who cares if you shoot 42% versus 50% when you're getting an extra 15 shots and Gonzaga's a better rebounding team. So
you're bringing me right to Craig and I's favorite stat, shot volume, right? So we talk about shot volume all the time. It really is just the number of shots you take, right? If you shoot at a lower percentage, but you're taking more shots, then you're going to score more points, right? And so shot volume comes from two things. It comes from minimizing turnovers and grabbing offensive rebounds. By the way, Gonzaga 1, 2 in the West Coast Conference in those two things. Yeah. Right? Number 1 in offensive turnover percentage, like we said, less than 13% in conference play. And in conference play, they are rebounding 36% of their own misses. Meanwhile, we are a bad defensive rebounding team. We are a team that gives the ball away a ton on offense. We're an okay offensive rebounding team. Yeah. But we give the ball away a ton on offense. We essentially neuter ourselves, right, by making sure we take fewer shots because we're giving the ball away, which is the only outcome where nothing happens, right? Because you don't get a shot up. So in my mind, it's really just those two things. Do we take care of the ball? And do we so basically turnovers and rebounding, I think to me, are really where this lands because there's not a lot of statistical difference offensively between or even defensively between these two teams except for those things, right? Like we are exceptionally bad at holding on to the ball. And so we, like I said, neuter ourselves by having fewer shot attempts. And then we are not good at defensive rebounding, and so we give the other team more shot attempts. And I think those are the two things that really, really stick out. So if we can somehow take care of the ball. Now, there have been times this year where we have taken care of the ball. But we tend to have like a couple of good games and a bad game, right? That's kind of the last 3 games. Yeah. We had a couple of good games, and then St. Mary's, it was 25% again, right? Yeah. So maybe this will be a pop-up again of a good game. Probably more likely to have a good turnover game at home. So we'll see how that goes. And then rebound.
An inordinate amount, 17.9%.
Like if we can rebound, defensive rebound, if we can do those two things, if we can defensive rebound and we cannot turn the ball over, I really like the chances. I like our chances in the game. We definitely have a puncher's chance with our offense. And then we just need to not, again, neuter ourselves with those things. So that's kind of in my mind, those are kind of the two things that really, stand out to me. If we can do those two things, I think we've got a fighting chance. Now, in the gym, I know this is always one of your fun things. How you feeling about what's the vibe around Pullman? What do you think do you think the students are going to show up? How you feeling about how many Gonzaga fans are going to be there versus Cougs? I've talked to a lot of Cougs who are going to be there, people traveling over the mountains to go do it. So I'm not exactly sure. Kind of my assumption has always been it might be like 50-50-ish. But I don't know. Maybe not. I don't know.
I think it's going to be better than 50-50 for Wazoo. again, I'll believe it when I see it because I've heard a lot about how there's going to be great crowds for this, that, and the other. There's also the part of I don't care how many people are in the stands if they don't cheering.
Yeah.
What I will say is, you go to I've been down to 2 games at the Kennel this year, the men's and women's Wazoo games, and it's not just that place is sold out, and that place is small. It's a lot smaller than Beasley, but
for sure.
The students are engaged. They're not checking their phones. They're certainly not sitting. They are coordinated in everything that they're yelling at opponents and everything, all the cheers and all the intros and all that stuff. It's because that's been the thing for so long. And the one time we saw it, the opposite was last year when it was actually packed and people did care. But some of the games this year where there might be a lot of people standing, and maybe they cheer when something good happens, but it's about, you bring that energy in the second you step into the gym. So, again, I'm hopeful, I'm optimistic, but I need to see an actual presence from the student section that isn't just, cheering when a 3 goes in and, randomly starting a fuck the Huskies chant.
Yeah.
Like that. I know it's the timeless tradition.
We need a real good fuck Gonzaga. We need one of those.
And
right?
Sure. Exactly. But I know it's the timeless chant, but it looks really stupid when we're not playing the Huskies. And
yes.
So we'll see. I worry that and then the team has to respond. You can't get a big crowd there. You can't get a bunch of people in crimson and gray.
Yes.
And then get buried.
I do worry that they're going to get overamped. They've had a tendency to do that at times. They did that against Washington. Washington was a mess, right? Like that was a huge part of the problem in that game was that they were so overamped, so over aggressive, and the refs sort of obliged them. Now again, road game, Big Ten refs, whatever, like maybe that's the thing. But we also know like WSU does not tend to get a great whistle at home. Like, and I don't anticipate. I know. I don't anticipate that they're going to get a good whistle against Gonzaga. Like, I don't think that's going to happen. So the question is, so does the team rise to the occasion? Are they able to keep their emotions in check? You mentioned that earlier, that they're a really emotional bunch. And, I'll even go so far as to say they're a reflection of their coach. Like David Riley, players are a reflection of their coach. And David Riley's an emotional guy as well. I think that maybe fans don't totally see it as much, but if you're in the arena, you notice David Riley is he's working the refs, he's emotional. He got teed up at one point this year, just like seemingly all of his players have at some point this year. So, are they going to be able to keep their emotions in check? Are they going to be able to channel that in a way? Because it is going to be packed. It's going to be, the energy is going to be high. They're going to be pumped up to play Gonzaga at home. Are they going to be able to keep that in check? And if they can somehow pull this off, there was a little bit of momentum for crowds earlier in the year when it felt like they were cruising toward, all right, hey, maybe we got something here with David Riley. And then, of course, that, the Pacific game just fucked that completely up.
Yes.
But you win this game, all right. You finally beat Gonzaga. It's kind of like an Apple Cup effect, I think.
You get
a few games after that. Yeah, you got a few games after that, all 3 of which are winnable. 2 of them at home, 1 on the road. Like, honestly, you could kind of see this like springboarding them into the WCC tournament. And so, and then you'd love to just see some life. I mean, you'd love to see Gonzaga, being forced to come back to Pullman for the first time after canceling the series. Like, you'd love to see them lose, right? Like, all those things can do some pretty great things for the program. So, yeah, so I'm excited. I'm going to be doing like kind of 3 things at once. I got a union meeting like at 5, and then the Sounders play at, I don't know, 6 or something. They got Champions League, and then Cougars. So I'm going to be like glued in front of my TV watching all. Of course, you'll be in the arena, so
sure will.
So that'll be exciting.
I learned now 30 seconds ago the Sounders play tomorrow.
Yes.
I had no idea.
Yeah, first game of the season. I know.
Maybe it's going against Antigua.
Yeah. Antigua, Guatemala. Actually, oh, hey, funny note. Antigua, Guatemala is Antigua GFC. So I don't know whether to take that as a good sign or a bad sign. I'm honestly not sure, but I'm just going to call them Antigua Go Fucking Cougs. And I'm just going to take that as a good sign for beating Gonzaga. All right, we should move on. We've talked a lot. Before the show, we were like, we're not going to do one of these long mega shows like I do with Craig. No, we're already there. We're 55 minutes in. So let's talk about beer. Okay, so I'm gonna let you go first because Craig always has me go first, and I'm gonna be like, all right, I'm gonna take the role of Craig. So Jamey, what are you drinking tonight?
We got ourselves a limited release Red Chair Northwest Pale Ale. Good old Deschutes.
Yep, Deschutes. Fantastic.
It's brewed in Bend, Oregon. 6.2%.
Yes, it is. Indeed. Are you a big Deschutes fan, or was that just kind of what was on the shelf?
I think I just picked this off the rack at Rose Hours. I think I do like Deschutes, and I don't think I'd had this before, so I said, all right, let's.
Yeah. Red Chair is a good beer.
Yeah, no,
Red Chair is a good beer. I've had that. It's been a while since I've had it, but it's a good beer.
Yeah, no, I was in, like I think I mentioned at the top of the show, I was in California all weekend, so there was a lot of mostly Corona drinking. So it changed, a little classier.
As the locals do, right? When in Rome. All right, cool. All right, hey, so what I got is, I'll hold it up here for the camera. I got this Larrabee Lager Company Winter Brow Winter Lager from it's brewed in Bellingham. One of the reasons why I kind of went for this, I was at a grocery store up in Bellingham a few weeks ago, and I was like, well, it's a lager company. They apparently specialize in lagers. I've never heard of them before. I'm sure if Craig was sitting here, he'd be like, oh yes, I've heard of Larrabee.
Of course.
Let me tell you a 13-minute story about Larrabee Lager Company. But I've never heard of them, but I was like, hey, a lager company. I'll bet they're lagers. You know, if they specialize in lagers, probably pretty good. So I thought, well, it's winter time. I'll go for the Winter Brow Winter Lager. And I'm going to be honest. It is a really, really, really good dark lager. I'm not typically a huge dark lager fan. But, you know, I thought, yeah, it's winter time, you know, dark lagers. I think that is a sort of like a pleasant style for this time of year when it's cold out, a little belly warmer. So this one, it's good. Like it's super roasty and like a little bit of coffee flavor to it. Really excellent beer. Definitely enjoying that. And this, folks, is where the end of my analysis comes in because I am not Craig. All right. So let's move along to football. And as we get started with football, I'll be cracking my backup beer here from the Old Crimson Legendary Lager collection in my fridge. So here's what I want to talk about with football. So we got Jamey on. Jamey, of course, writes for CougFan.com. A website that made its bones, as it were, covering recruiting back when it was, did it start as a Rivals? Did it start as a Rivals site or did it start as a Scout site? Do you remember? Do you know? I can't remember.
CougFan was, I was 2 years old when CougFan started.
Okay.
It was Scout.
If Greg was here, he'd probably be yelling at me.
It was, I know it was Scout.
Okay. Yeah. And I knew that before it was 24/7 and whatever. Okay.
I should know that. I don't.
It's okay. It's all right. Yes, you were just a little baby child when that all happened. Regardless, you know, started as part of a recruiting network. So recruiting is always going to kind of be, you know, part of the core of what you guys do at CougFan. And so I figured I would tap into your expertise here a little bit on this one because I have found it increasingly difficult to follow football recruiting for WSU with, you know, it's you know, you got 2 signing days, you got transfer portal stuff, which happens in between the signing days. And so there's all this stuff that's like really tough to keep track of. So maybe catch our readers up a little bit. So there was a signing day, like, I don't know, 2 weeks ago, right?
Yep.
Was the late signing day. So maybe catch people up a little bit on, so we know a whole bunch of people transferred out. We don't need to sort of go over all the folks who transferred out, some of whom, you know, followed Jake, some of whom went wherever else. More interested in the guys who've come in. A large proportion of them transferred from San Diego State with Jimmy Rogers. So
South Dakota State.
Good Lord. Ooh, SDSU stuck in my head. South Dakota State. Sorry, folks. It is late, and I've been teaching. It's 11 o'clock at night right now, and I've been teaching today. South Dakota State. A lot of guys follow Jimmy Rogers from South Dakota State. So that's a big proportion of the class. And then maybe some of the high schoolers as well, like kind of what your read is on some of those guys and kind of overall the class, kind of what you think of it and sort of the overall philosophy of it.
Yeah, I think what stands out is you get 57 new guys this year. I mean, by the time
that's a lot. That's like half the roster.
Yeah, by the time you get to
half.
fall camp, you've got 57 guys, and a good chunk are already here. You get 22 transfers already enrolled, 9 high school players enrolled, 1 JUCO transfer enrolled, and then you still have 25 more guys that are going to sign in June, or that are going to join the team in June. What was so unique is in the past few years, the February signing period hasn't been anything to watch. I mean, really not since Jake's took over as the permanent head coach, and even then, I think they signed probably 9 guys. I mean, they signed 18. They basically, because and it wasn't necessarily they lost a few guys from the high school ranks. I think it ended up being after the coaching change, lost 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. But they basically wanted to get their own type of recruits in, and a lot of them came from South Dakota State, as one would expect. So you had, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. You had 13 come from South Dakota State, plus 16 transfers. So there is obviously half the class was tied to South Dakota State, but they also went out and grabbed, got a quarterback from Seattle that was signed to Utah State and had opened things up when Bronco Mendenhall took over. There was a couple linemen out there that were still at that point unrecruited or unsigned or however you want to call it. And the thing that stands out to me about some of the South Dakota State guys is, yes, there are a few guys that they signed who South Dakota State was their best offer. They're some of the lower end guys that you would expect an FCS school to take. But you flip on. A great example is Carter Paps, who's a receiver out of Goddard, Kansas, and he had two offers: North Dakota and South Dakota State. And the initial thought would be, okay, that seems to be a pretty good tell of maybe where he should be playing. Okay, well, he had 29 touchdowns this year, and was tied for the nation's lead in receiving touchdowns. So, yeah, for whatever reason, his offers didn't take off, and maybe he doesn't have the elite quickness or something. But you're able to produce like that. I don't care who you're playing. 29 touchdowns is 29 touchdowns. So he's a guy that kind of draws some of that interest in that way, and then. You look at some of the other guys, Aramis Wright, for example, from Illinois. I mean, this guy had offers from Michigan State and Ole Miss. Were they committable at the time he committed to SDSU? Maybe not, but it's not like sometimes you'll see a kid who, he was offered by these schools 3 years ago. They offered him a month before he committed to South Dakota State. So in the same time frame that he committed to South Dakota State, Ole Miss and Michigan State said, yes, we are interested in this kid enough to offer him. And there's a few other examples. Sullivan Schlimgen, the linebacker from Sioux Falls, I mean, he was scheduled to visit Texas Tech and said, no, I'm committing to South Dakota State. So that does certainly interest me in that they were, were they going toe-to-toe and beating out, Michigan and Georgia? Of course not. But there were players that had at least some degree of interest from Power 4 schools and said, no, I'm good. I'm comfortable going here. And again, it's a different story if, this guy was offered 5 years ago, like Steele Pizzella, for example.
And we see that kind of stuff.
Exactly. Steele Pizzella had an offer from Georgia.
Right.
Steele Pizzella did not have an offer from, not have a standing offer from Georgia. And just so we're
certainly not to play quarterback anyway.
Right. And just so I'm on record as saying this, I am not just saying that because he's committed elsewhere now. you go look at his offer list, and this is one of the things I love that 247 does, is it lets you know when guys got offered. Okay.
Yep.
Steele Pizzella was offered by Georgia. Let's take a little look-see here. You got to go all the way back to March of 2022.
Right.
This is before Jake Dickert had coached a full game had coached a game as the full-time head coach.
Right.
His offer 2.5 years later wasn't committable. They hoped he was going to grow. He didn't grow.
Right.
That offer just it sits there, and that's true with a lot. I mean, Javon Clark, who signed with the Dickert class, stuck with the Rogers class, and is now enrolled and is very good. But his offer list shows. I think it shows Georgia as well. Okay. Yeah. By the time he signed, no, Georgia, he didn't have an offer from Georgia, and that's just that's the truth of the matter. And again, you can go all the way back and you look when that offer was. He committed to Wyoming in April of 2024. All right, Georgia offered him last August. So, but I think there's a difference for a guy like Schlimgen, who was supposed to visit Texas Tech, a guy like Wright, who those offers came within a few weeks. That okay, there's some interesting pieces to that puzzle. And then you watch some of the film and the tape can only tell you so much. And if you recruit purely off huddle highlights, you're doing it wrong. But there are certainly some skill sets, especially in the trenches, that are interesting. And I do think what you saw towards the end of this class is going to be a continuing trend. I think you're going to see a lot of offensive linemen from the Midwest. And I think that's good because those are some just big, tough farm boys out there. But, you look at the offensive linemen, they have 5 right now at the prep ranks. 1 holdover from the Dickert class from California. Yeah. Or 2 holdovers from the Dickert class. 1 from California, 1 ironically from Nebraska. And then they go and add 3 others. Missouri, Arizona, which is going to be another Rogers tie because he's from there originally, and Wisconsin. Right. They're going to get those Midwestern guys. And, I think, and I know for a fact, too, that Rogers didn't just say to every recruit, hey, you can come with us if you want. There were kids that they said that were signed with South Dakota State that said, hey, we just don't have a spot for you. There was one kid in particular who because when Rogers made the move, I reached out to all the kids to see what I could find out. And one kid in particular, I asked, hey, have you been invited to come with Coach Rogers to Wazoo? And he said, no, I'm not. I was told, there wasn't going to be a spot for me. But Coach Rogers is awesome, and Wazoo is getting 1 of 1 as a coach. And I'm like, okay, that says something that a kid who was told more or less, hey, you're not good enough to play at this level, or whatever was said. It probably wasn't said that bluntly, but basically said, no, I'm good. I'm cool with Coach Rogers, and which I thought says a lot because and he didn't. I didn't ask him what do you think of Coach Rogers? He offered that up, because you ask any kid what they think of a previous coach, they're going to say something nice. You ask any of the recruits who signed with Dickert that stuck with Wazoo are going to say the same thing, but it was unprompted, which I found very interesting. So. I do think again it's different. It's a little unique from what we've expected in recruiting, and just in that there's a whole lot of. There's Minnesota, there's Illinois, there's Missouri, there's all these states that Wazoo just doesn't recruit. It's 2025, and you just signed more kids from Minnesota, Missouri, and Illinois than Texas. But I think it's interesting how far out his range is going to be, and they've got ties in Florida too. If they want to open that pipeline back up. And I think Rogers understands the importance of the Polynesian connection when you look at you got Upati and Everett Thompson and Nick Alemalo on staff.
Yep. I kind of like the idea. Well, number one, this is going to be, it's going to be a little different for people in terms of what they see on the field, right? It's going to be big boy, smash mouth football. Anybody who watched, and I would not blame anybody who did not watch, South Dakota State at all. I watched. I'm not going to say I watched a lot, right? I watched that game they played against North Dakota State in the playoffs. That was a fantastic game. You could probably find that on YouTube or something if you want to go look for it. Great game, really fun to watch. But that gives you a sense of what South Dakota State does. They had, Gronowski, who was a load and a half, basically like John Mateer. If John Mateer was I don't know, 3 inches taller and 30 pounds heavier, like same kind of player, but just bigger, right? And he ends up transferring to Iowa.
Yep.
Iowa, yeah. So he ends up transferring to Iowa. And so what they do is just, it's power football. And, I don't know. I'm not old enough as a Coug fan to know if we've like really ever done that, if I'm being honest, because we haven't done that in my lifetime. We've always run, spread attacks. Mike Price was the OG of the spread offense. So, we've always run spread attacks, but the key is, and I think, and this is where I'm really intrigued, is the key isn't, I don't think, whether you run a spread attack or an air raid or whatever, right? Like, to me is, okay, if you're at Wazoo, you need some kind of market inefficiency that you're going to exploit, right? And I even said that with basketball, back in the day when Ken Bone got fired and they were looking, Bill Moose is looking for a new coach. I wrote a big, long thing at Cougs Center about what they should be looking for as a coach. And one of the biggest things I said was, like, you need someone who can figure out a way to tap into talent pools that aren't just the traditional talent pools, right? And they went and hired Ernie Kent, and of course Ernie Kent tried to do what he did at Oregon, doesn't work, right? Well, then you go get Kyle Smith. Well, then again, look at how Kyle Smith adds talent, right? One of his big like signings right off the top is Efe, right? Who is this under the radar kid, playing basketball in Australia after, growing up in Africa, blows out his knee, hyper athletic, but also like under recruited, right? Because of this injury. And Kyle Smith sort of does that again and again and again, recruiting these guys who were, he recruits international guys, you mentioned earlier, you mentioned Andre, you mentioned Mogay, you mentioned, like, you look at these guys who he recruited from other countries, who he's able to bring in and sort of like add talent without going head to head with, schools in the U.S. for top 100 kids, right? So, you put all that together and it's like, okay, you got to figure out a way to add talent in ways that are not traditional spread offenses, air raid, whatever. That's just kind of another way to do that, right? Like, you're adding guys who, okay, so your quarterbacks don't have to have massive arms, right? They need to be quick decision makers. Their arm needs to be good enough, but it doesn't have to be massive. And so you don't need, a 4.5, 4-star, 5-star guy to be able to run that offense, right? And in fact, sometimes that's actually not helpful, right? What you really want is a guy who processes quick, gets the ball out quick, figures out where the ball is supposed to go right away, who could think it through, right? And then you get these wide receivers who, again, most of the time, not huge guys or not the fastest guys, but you get a guy like River Craycraft who is able to work in the slot. He's 6 feet tall. He's not ultra fast, but he's not ultra twitch, but also like he's a really good route runner and he's really smooth and he's athletic. And, and that guy goes and spends, whatever. I mean, he's working on a decade career in the NFL at this point. So it's like, what's your inefficiency going to be on defense with Leach's teams? The best defenses, the inefficiency was Samoa, right? You had Coach Joe out there recruiting on the rock, bringing all these guys in. Frankie Louvu's out here tearing up the NFL right now, one of those guys. There was a lot of those guys, right? Ekwale, Robert Barber, you just name, Hercules obviously is the biggest one. He was from Hawaii, but like,
right.
You had all these kids who were brought in who, again, inefficiency, right? They weren't, Fred Malgoa is another one. They weren't rated as recruits, right? Joe goes and gets them. They come in. All of a sudden, it's like, okay, you got a level of athleticism by recruiting there that you wouldn't have gotten if you tried to go head to head with Washington, Oregon, USC, whatever, right? So to bring it back around to what Jimmy Rogers is doing, like, I look at that, recruiting the Midwest for those big boys. I look at that kind of the same way. Like, yes, like we've always kind of looked at it like, well, recruiting the lines is always like the biggest challenge. Where do you find these guys? We can't win head-to-head recruiting battles for those kinds of bodies. But it's like, if there's one thing the Midwest has, it's got a pretty fair amount of big dudes.
Right.
Which is why, schools like Wisconsin, Minnesota, whatever, have sort of built their identities on, being these big, sort of power football schools. And I think that when you're bringing in a coaching staff from the Midwest, maybe do what you know how to do. And when we brought in, Eric Morris from Texas, bring those boys from Texas with you, whatever it is, go where you're comfortable, go where you know the people, and recruit to the thing you know how to do. And I do think that can be successful. And I think you look at Boise State, it's not that different of a formula from what Boise State has done.
No.
Where it's like they're recruiting big boys from that area, and they are building schools that are they're building offenses built on power football. And then all of a sudden you add in, a transformational talent like Genty, and all of a sudden you've got a really explosive type offense. And so I'm definitely intrigued by that. Let me ask you this. Are you at all concerned just adding so many guys who either played at the FCS level or were signed to play at the FCS level? On the one, so I'm kind of two minds, right? So up until a month ago, I was like, well, hey, look at the basketball team. That's working out great. Obviously not working out so great right now. So it's like, okay, should I feel like, on the one hand, I want to feel like the floor is kind of raised by adding all these guys. And when you talk about, sort of an elite level FCS program, I think you're really talking about if we were to add it, put it in rankings, you might say okay, that's a program that might rank 80-ish or something like that in FBS. Right, out of the 130, 140 teams in FBS, you're probably a slightly below average FBS team, or maybe even a little more than that, but just somewhere in there, right? But so if that's the case, that turns you into a pretty average or above average Mountain West team, right? Mm-hmm. And even though we're not playing a Mountain West schedule this year, that still kind of puts you in that ballpark. So maybe it raises the floor, but limits your ceiling. I'm not sure. Kind of what's your read on what that sort of means, adding all these guys from FCS? Does it concern you?
I don't want to say it doesn't, but it also it does and it doesn't. I mean, so here's the big thing I'll point out, because I've seen this posted on our on the Cougs fan message boards and around is, oh, this is what Wolf did. He brought a bunch of Eastern guys, etc. The difference was Paul Wolf was coming off, I think, 6-5, and I mean, Paul Wolf had success at Eastern. Don't get me wrong. There's a difference to what Jimmy Rogers did at South Dakota State.
I was going to say the success that he had at Eastern is not even remotely in the ballpark of what South Dakota State has done.
Right, and and there's a million metrics, obviously, but. I mean, Jeff Sagarin's college ratings are usually pretty good. I think they're fairly they're a good metric. South Dakota State was 37th this year.
Okay.
Period. That's higher than the highest amongst FCS teams, so higher than NDSU, who won the title. That's higher than Auburn and Utah.
Higher than us.
Auburn and Utah, who won 5 games, but still are Auburn and Utah. Higher than Washington, higher than Texas Tech, higher than the military schools. 73. Yikes! That's where Wazoo was. But
Well,
we'll
just blame that on Jake Dickert. Fuck that guy.
We were talking about Boise State. SDSU was 37 and Boise State was 31.
Yep.
And that there's something to be said about that. Now, yes, if they played an FBS schedule, would they have enjoyed the same success? Of course not. I think everyone kind of understands that. But I would say if they were going and hiring the head coach of let's find a good of Montana, which is Bobby Hauck, who obviously people know well, I would be a little more concerned. It's not that Hauck's not a good coach, but that to me is a good FCS team. Montana's a good FCS team, whereas a South Dakota State or a North Dakota State, for that matter, those are elite. And this isn't, they had a one-off. Like, these have been sustained, two of the best programs in the country. I mean, South Dakota State is producing NFL talent every single year. So I think I look at that, and then I say, okay, yeah, are there a few guys that they've maybe taken, either recruiting-wise or from the roster that, okay, or that are risks? I would say so. I'm not going to name those, but and that's also just sometimes, a 1,000-yard view. Obviously, Rodgers has earned, I would say, in my opinion, has earned the trust of he knows what he wants. And so I'll give you, a good example. He brings a few freshmen from last year. Maxwell Woods, Fernando Laquona, Nick Backen, Anthony Polano, Karsten Reynolds, Trey Ridley. And guys who didn't play a whole lot. They all played, I think, 6 or 7 games, preserved the red shirt because most of those were in the postseason. But if he was willing to play those guys on a team that went 12-3 last year, clearly there's a belief that, okay, these guys are going to be able to make that step. And I think that's where it's very interesting in that, he wasn't taking he didn't take any of the guys that just were buried on the roster. The guys who, he didn't take a redshirt junior who hasn't played at all. This guy, we really like this kid. He's a good kid. Like all the guys who he's taken have played. And that's not even getting into the top end guys. I mean, the fact of the matter is, the guy I always pointed was Tucker Large, the safety, who I think you could argue was maybe their best player last year besides Wildy, the receiver. If Tucker Large hits the open market, he's playing in the Big Ten or the SEC or somewhere. He's small. He's a little undersized, but he was an FCS All-American, according to a few outlets. So he's the type of guy that, I would look at and say, okay, you see FCS guys transfer up all the time, and it works. I mean, the number 1 overall pick in this next NFL draft most likely came from the FCS ranks. We know him well.
We know him pretty well.
Yeah.
We know that guy.
So
we heard of him.
Exactly. So there are going to be guys, and I think Large is an example of that. I think Caleb Francel. I think Max Balloon. Angel Johnson was visiting Tennessee until he decided to come with Rodgers and Robbie Rouse. Other guys like Matt Durant, Cale Reeder, Colby Humphrey. I mean, these are all guys that I think if they hit the open market would have been very sought after. Are they all going to go to the Big Ten? Maybe not. But these are all guys who there would have been FBS teams that wanted them. And I think that's where the key comes in is, and a lot of them, the other thing too is a lot of them are seniors. If they bring in a lot of these guys in and it doesn't work out, they can, that's the beauty of the portal. Try it again next year. They'll be able to see. And then some of those guys that I was mentioning, Laquona, Polano, Reynolds, Woods, Ridley, you don't have to plug them in right away, right? Ridley can develop another year under Durant, Large, and Reeder at safety. With Polano and Reynolds, you've got Keith Brown, Parker McKenna, and Caleb Francel ahead of him. Laquona's going to likely be in that defensive end rotation. I mean, they have 83 running backs to where Woods can work under Voorhees, Angel Johnson, Pugalasi, Schlenbaker, Payne, etc. So I think the way they've positioned it is they're bringing guys in, but they're augmenting guys that either have proven they can play at this level, or, here's the real truth of it. I mean, we saw what the defense was last year, and look at what South Dakota State's defense was last year. One was a lot better.
Yeah.
And now, the flip side of that is there was not a lack of talent on last year's defense, obviously, as evidenced by where a lot of these guys are now playing. But, I think, too, it's, Rodgers was hired, December 28th? Well, there's only so much he can do at that point. Portal's closed. You got to be able to bring what you can bring. And I do think, look, if he goes and is consistently taking, he takes another 16 guys from SDSU next year or something like that, then I would say, okay, I don't know if I buy that. But I think it would be the same thing as if David Riley went and said, okay, I took Coward, Luan Watts, Eric Triple Price. All right, now I'm taking Mason Williams, Sebastian Hartman,
right.
Wart, Nick McClain. To me, that's where, okay, maybe there's a one-off where, there was a kid who we thought about, but then he ended up developing, okay, now we're ready, that kind of deal. But
Right.
I would be concerned if it gets to that point, which I don't think it will. But just on the surface of the guys they brought, like, here's the thing, just to kind of wrap this thought up. There were occasions, and I always will give Dick credit, I think he did a good job recruiting and a good job getting and developing talent. It was just the in-game issues that were obviously extremely problematic. But even then, there was always a guy or two that they would bring in either via the portal or the prep ranks where I would just be like, okay, I don't see the idea behind this guy. There was a linebacker they brought in a few years ago, Devon Hicks from South Florida, who was a backup on a bad South Florida team. And it didn't make a lot of sense, and he didn't play, and he was gone after a year. When I look down this list of guys, like, I see what they're going for realistically with all of them, where that's a position of need, or, okay, this guy might sit a year, but long-term, you're going to need a guy in that spot or something of that ilk. And I think that's where you see kind of the vision. And then you kind of see it too with the high school recruits. You kind of get the idea of, all right, they didn't like what the secondary was looking like because they brought in about 10 new defensive backs purely on high school kids plus all the transfers.
There we go. I thought I lost you for a second.
No, I'm here.
Yeah, I think that, like I said, I'm of two minds. Not sure if this is like high floor, low ceiling situation or what. I do know that like this is just going to be, regardless, this was going to be a tough year.
Yeah.
The schedule sucks. The schedule is super shitty. It is not fun. So in that respect, I actually kind of don't hate it necessarily. And so part of the reason why I don't hate it is even if it doesn't necessarily translate into 6 wins, right? Like, I think that's kind of the big goal, right? Get to 6, like, if we can get to 6 wins, get to a bowl game, that's, I think, a pretty big success. Even if it doesn't translate to 6 wins, I do think it raises the floor that the idea of a crash and burn, I think, is sort of off the table. Like, I think that's you've avoided that by not bringing in, 50 guys who are just cobbled together from wherever, right? Which is really it's really what you were looking at, right? With the number of guys who left, needing a recruiting class, like, you were going to be bringing in 50 new guys no matter what.
Yeah.
And so in that respect, I don't hate that he, sort of stuck with what he knew, stuck with guys that he knew. I do wonder a little bit for a guy who has only ever had experience at FCS, if he really understands what it takes, like the talent level that's necessary to compete at this level. Maybe he does, but I think we have seen, to sort of demonstrated repeatedly that there is a bit of a learning curve for understanding, okay, look, like what worked here may not work over here. I think that's kind of what we're going through with Riley right now, is like what worked over here, not necessarily going to work over here. And I think a lot of coaches, not just David Riley, I think a lot of coaches go through that where, it's just like, it's not just straight necessarily translatable a lot of times with these things. So I think I do worry a little bit about that, but that said, this year is it's really kind of a lost year to begin with. I know nobody's approaching it that way. Nobody's like, Steve Rogers isn't out there. Steve Rogers, God damn.
Captain America.
Jimmy Rogers. Good Lord. My God. Jimmy Rogers he's not out here preparing to lose. Right. But at the same time, like it's you're still just sort of in the wilderness with your conference schedule, but the following year you're going to have a conference home. You're playing this ridiculous schedule where you're flying all over the country to just play basically whoever will take you for this year. So you put all that together, the cards are really stacked against them. So in that sense, a year of maybe learning like 2 things. One is what it really takes, I think, to be successful. at this level and against those kinds of athletes. And then number two, who of these guys that you brought in can actually play? And I do think without with this year of limbo, it is important that they don't crash and burn. It's important they don't go Paul Wolf, right? Like, I think that's, let's just like call it what it is. Like, it's important that they don't embarrass themselves, right? And I think bringing these guys in, I think embarrassing yourself is sort of like not a thing that's going to happen. Maybe it does, but I kind of feel like that's probably not going to happen.
No.
Plus, you got a quarterback. By the way, let's just say what it is. Like, we know Zevi Eckhouse can play.
Yeah.
Like, maybe he's not great. He's not maybe John Mateer take over a game situation, but we know he's not bad. And to be honest, having a not bad quarterback is like
Miles
75% of your offense, right? Yeah. So I feel like the floor is okay. Like, the floor is all right. Don't embarrass yourself. Learn kind of what the deal is coaching at this level, learn what's neat. You're going to play some high level teams. They're going to see, up close real quick what it means to play against, elite athletes when they play Washington or whatever. And so, they're going to figure some things out. They're going to be able to evaluate the guys that they brought over, and they're going to be able to see, all right, so is this guy, if we keep developing this guy, right? A lot of, like you said, a lot of freshmen, guys they were high on as recruits, as guys that could develop. Like, okay, if we keep this guy around, we can see that he can be this down the road, or it's, this guy maybe not so much. So I think I like that part of it. I think that part can work out. And I do think that, it's going to be, I think, a year that tests our patience a little bit. Just because they're set up to not be successful. Like, the schedule is so much in college football. Like, ask Stanford and Cal how it went last year with traveling all over, crisscrossing all over the country, going coast to coast to coast to coast all the time. It's really shitty, and it doesn't. It's not a recipe for success.
Not at all.
So I think, So I think what they're doing, I think, is fine. If they can somehow win 6 games, Jimmy Rogers is my hero, and I will be, I will be thrilled. All right, let's wrap up here. Let's wrap up with some women's basketball talk super fast. All right, 5 minutes. 5 minutes, women's basketball talk. Now, if you are a person who does not pay particular attention to women's basketball, you might be surprised to find out that Washington State finds itself right now in 3rd place in the WCC by a couple of games, a game and a half. They're a game and a half ahead of St. Mary's. They got a few games left in the season. So they are in good shape to be in that top 4. As we know, in the WCC, so important to be in the top 4 if you can, because that means you would only need to win 3 games in 3 days to win the tournament crown and take the auto bid. They did suffer a little bit of a setback the other night over the weekend. Weekend was not kind to the Cougs. They lost to Portland again, fucking Portland. But they do finish out with 3 very winnable games. San Francisco, St. Mary's, Pepperdine. They should be favored in all 3 of those. 2 of them at home, Pepperdine on the road, and Pepperdine's one of the worst teams in Division I. So let's talk here. So it looks like Mendez had another huge weekend. Diana Mendez had a big weekend for the Cougs. She's a very exciting freshman, super athletic, is a kid who Cami Etheridge has showered praise on, which is not Cami's MO normally, but has also been a little tough on her as well. So, all right, how are you? So as we look at this week that's coming up, they play San Francisco on Thursday, St. Mary's on Saturday, 2 home games. How you feeling about those? I imagine you'll be in attendance for those 2.
Of course. Doubleheader Saturday, which is a rarity.
Yeah.
But
that's excellent.
They've kind of Gonzaga and Portland are very good and very old.
Yes.
Wazoo is good, but not old. I mean, Gonzaga has their all-time program leading scorer, Ivan Ejim. Portland's trio of Mikkel Meek, Maisie Burnham, Emmy Shearer have all been there for 30 years.
Yeah.
You know,
well, what the Cougs got going, so just like we got a couple of players who are pretty old, and then everybody else is really young, right? Like, so you got like Tara Wallach, super experienced, right? But it's like after that, and then I guess I guess you could say like AT is she's junior, right? So like pretty experienced. Yeah. But then after that, you got sophomore, freshman, freshman, right?
Right.
As you go on down,
it's a much younger team than, you know, I think for years we heard Cammy talking about how the team's starting to get old, and then, well, okay, all the old players graduated, and just because she doesn't use it or like the portal, and you know, it's hard to argue a lot of the results have been she's been pretty darn good without it, but they do more of a conventional rebuild, if you want to call it that, where they're going to go and, you know, and it might not look pretty all the time, and you know, again, all things hopeful, they're going to be staring down the barrel of another year of everybody besides Tara Wallach, who will be a huge loss. Tara's great, and a great on the team, but
figuring everybody else gets better, right?
Which I think is where things get very interesting, and you know, they're not going to get one of the top two. I mean, they could hypothetically get one of the top two seeds, but Portland and Gonzaga aren't going to just implode. But as long as you take care of San Francisco and St. Mary's, which again you should, you get the 3 seed, which means you're off until Sunday, and they have played Portland and Gonzaga. I mean, Gonzaga, they have played extremely tight twice. Portland got them pretty good in Pullman, but they played them tight in Portland.
Yep.
Hard to beat a team 3 times. You know, in almost all likelihood, if you stay at the 3 seed, you're going to get Portland. You are going to have an opportunity to get them, again, you got to win that first game first. But if you get the 3 seed, you win Sunday, the opportunity is going to be there where you know what you have to do. You got to. This isn't one of the years where, you know, the past years we're playing if they win this game in the conference tournament and this game, there's no at-large bid. We know that. That went out the window with the non-con. But
yes,
there is a very simple path to the tournament. You win your Sunday game, and then you beat Portland and most likely Gonzaga. Is it easy? No.
And those are not, like, let's be clear. Like, in contrast to the men's side, these are not like, you know, 8,000-pound gorillas in Gonzaga and Portland. Like, these are not like elite level teams like you're seeing with Gonzaga and St. Mary's right now on the men's side.
And I mean, they're good. They are absolutely good teams. But, you know, you look at the net rankings, for example, Portland's 76 and Gonzaga's 108. Like, those are beatable teams. And I think what has hurt Wazoo in the games that they've played against them is, again, that experience. But, you know, maybe as you get into March, you see that. I mean, we've seen in the past, you look at the team that won the conference tournament. Well, what played a huge role in that was, as you hit the Pac-12 tournament a couple years ago, is AT suddenly became a veteran player and grew up. And yes, it helped that Charlize went absolutely, you know, nuclear for 4 games. That didn't hurt you, but it certainly helped that just about every game in that tournament you had the best player on the floor, and that Stanford lost. But there is a precedent for, you know, Cammy's teams to get hot at the right time. And find that, you know, even last year, they didn't have the season they wanted. They still made a run in the women's NIT, went to the Final Four of it. Like, it's kind of what we've talked about is the opposites happened with the men's team. Cammy's teams get better as the season goes on. And I think they took Gonzaga to the absolute limit in the kennel. And Gonzaga has now won, like, I think it's 13 in a row. So they're not losing a whole lot right now. Gonzaga hasn't lost in 2025. Well, let's put that into perspective. So whatever was plaguing them early, they fixed because they've been unstoppable the last few months. You know, in Portland, like I said, is it a veteran experienced team? But, you know, they've got the talent. If they can put it together for 4 quarters and you see that the freshmen can kind of grow up, especially Mendez and Charlotte Abraham, and Marta Alzina as well. If those things happen, there is absolutely a realistic chance for them to make a run. Look, I think we can agree it's a long shot for the men, right? I mean, for them to have to, win from whatever it's going to be, Friday or Saturday to Tuesday, and have to beat at least two of Gonzaga, St. Mary's, Santa Clara, San Francisco, it's probably not going to happen.
Right.
Weird things happen. Again, I don't think any of us expected the women to make the run they did a few years ago, but when you look at the women's path, it's very much in play that if they position themselves well, which they shouldn't have an issue doing, they are capable of beating Portland and Gonzaga getting that bid. And it's only going to be, I think, it's only going to be a one-bid league. I mean, I don't think you're going to see a second unless somehow Portland gets in, but I think Gonzaga.
Nah, it's a one-bid league.
Yeah, and this is a good time. Gonzaga. This is the worst Gonzaga team net-wise in forever. Now, granted, they did what UCLA men's basketball became wonderful at doing: torpedoed themselves in the non-conference, and then got hot when the conference slate started. That was
assholes.
You're facing a UCLA team who's won 7 in a row, but 108 in Ken Palm because they lost to Riverside Community College in October or November. But actually, that was SC last year when the Cougs almost lost when Pullman. It's thanks SC for your losses to Long Beach State and whoever else. Now you're 98 in Ken Palm, but really freaking talented.
Ridiculous. I will say Portland is 2.5 games ahead of the Cougs. So really what would need to happen there. So the Cougs have played one more conference game. So really Portland would need to lose probably 3 of their last 4 for us to overtake them for second place, which is, I would say, pretty unlikely.
Yeah, I don't.
Given that Portland's going to play, they're going to be favored in their last 4 games. They play 4 of the worst teams in the WCC: San Diego, Santa Clara, San Francisco Pacific. So I think second place technically on the table, but not really on the table.
It pretty much went out when they lost on Saturday. But again, the number 3 seed is still off.
Yeah, 3 games in 3 days. That's perfectly doable. That, I mean, obviously they won 4 games in 4 days to take it the time before, but 3 games in 3 days, very doable. You're not going to be worn out by the time you get to those, top 2 seeds for the semis and the finals, presuming you win that first game. So feel pretty good about that. All right, let's wrap this up, dude. This has been a marathon. Let's wrap it up this way. First of all, I got to start the outro music. Hold on. Outro music. Okay, here it comes. I think. All right, so you should hear it start to marinate in. All right, so let's do this. Social medias. Where can they find you, Jamey?
Jamey Vinnick 9 on Twitter. J-A-Y. Other than that, for socials.
There you go. For me, you can find me on Blue Sky. I don't do the Twitters anymore for what I would hope would be obvious reasons to listeners of this fucking podcast. So you find me on Blue Sky. I am newscoog.podcastversuseveryone.com because Blue Sky does that kind of nifty stuff. And then you can also find Craig over there as well. Craig Powers. All right, I'm running out of music here. Here we go. Go fucking Cougs, Jamey.
Go Cougs.
Black Lives Matter.
Yes, they do. Black Lives
Join a union. Get vaccinated. All right, the music's gone. Good night, everybody.